May I start with the questions by congratulating you on your extensive quantity and breadth of qualifications to date. Which one means the most to you and why?
That's actually quite a complicated question. So, I mean, the PhD means quite a lot to me because the PhD was an opportunity to actually take some partial time out of practice and partially step off the treadmill for what turned out to be 4 or 5 years in the end. But that also gave me the opportunity to reevaluate what kind of general practitioner I wanted to be. It gave me the opportunity to meet my wife. It gave me the opportunity to move from central London to a leafy suburb of Oxford, and this is and it. But it also gave me a legitimate excuse to meet a wide network of colleagues, many of whom I now call friends. So in that way, those 3 letters, it's not the status, it's the opportunity that gave to open the door of my consulting room, step outside and attend conferences, talk to people. And it's not to say that it wasn't really grinding hard work, and not to say that I went from absolutely loving my sort of chosen topic to absolutely loving it slightly less by the end. But I think that it's something we're lacking as a profession. I think that one of the reasons why people are so ground down and put upon is that we're not giving ourselves the chance to decompress. We're not giving ourselves the chance to talk to each other. We're not giving ourselves the chance to sort of think sort of broad thoughts. And yeah, some of those broad thoughts might make our heads hurt more. But actually, in the grand scheme of things, I think our heads will hurt no matter what. So anyway, so you've triggered a bit of a rant there. I mean, the other thing I would say is that actually all of the alphabet soup that follows my name is similar. So when I was a medical student, I went on a bus tour of medical museums and found this place called the Society of Apothecaries of London, which if you've never visited it and you're in London and you have the opportunity to, it's so worth going. It's like a stately home hidden in the city of London, but it houses essentially one of the ancestral homes of general practice. So before GPs, there were family practitioners, and they were duly qualified surgeon apothecaries, and one of the places that licensed them was the Society of Apothecaries. And when I visited there on the medical museum, I found that they did a history diploma. This is the DPMSA. And I enjoyed that so much that I did a history of medicine intercalated degree. And again, this is the other thing about sort of history, that it's like a helicopter view of your profession. So I sort of went back into post intercalated degree absolutely recharged and sort of hit clinics running, but also enjoyed it so much that I had to do another one, and they do a philosophy diploma, so I did that. And so there's David Misselbrook from the BJGP. No, it's the BMJ, had a column called Diplomatosis, and you can get diplomatosis. It's a disease of medics characterized by a compulsive desire to acquire qualifications. So all of these have been sort of opportunities to a qualification isn't just some letters, it's an opportunity to go on a nerd holiday, and it's not really a holiday. You're helping to sort of gather yourself, define yourself, and see where you go next. And the job just doesn't give you the opportunity to do that, which we're back to, causes for burnout, which is I think a general practice pandemic.
Do you think it's specific or unique to general practice? I'm sure we can all acknowledge that specialists equally will experience burnout, as will any other non-healthcare professional. But what is it about general practice to you that kind of amplifies it or makes it particularly difficult?
Well, I'm in a very fortunate position as deputy editor in charge of the Life and Time section. I think these thoughts and don't know how to articulate them, and then people such as yourself send me an article, and I go, aha, that's what I've been thinking. And I think there are some big risks that general practitioners have, particularly general practitioners in the UK, that I don't think are shared by all other specialties. One is our enter the consulting room at dawn and leave the consulting room at dusk, sort of, for want of a better word, treadmill, and that one-to-oneness. So you have an entire day of problem, because, most people, if reception are doing their job, aren't coming to see you to tell you that everything's brilliant. Though occasionally that does happen, and I really like it when it does, because it's also an opportunity to catch up and do some opportunistic public health. But there's that unrelenting sense of sharing and witnessing, and there isn't very often an opportunity or a space to, what the psychiatrists, psychologists would call supervision in a broad sense, unless you go seek out a Balint group, or you go and seek out a sort of a local new practitioners group. And of course, these things do exist in various places, but they're sometimes, in my area, there was a group that formed around medical ethics, and that the kinds of sentiment expressed from that was that even if it didn't solve any problems, it helped the group sleep at night. Not because it was boring, but because people had a chance to sort of air the things that caused them difficulty. So I think there is that. The other thing I worry about a lot, in terms of workforce diversification and also tasking to AI, is that when all of the shallow end general practice disappears, so all of the check the blood pressure, review the medications stuff goes by the wayside, you're left potentially with a morning of, suicidal patient, need to call an ambulance, suicidal patient, need to call, and they are brain shredders. So we've got people sending us poems on decision fatigue, and interestingly, what the AI isn't doing is filtering through all our blood test results for us. So you're still having to act like a human computer and look through, hundreds potentially of results per day and try and reattach context to those. Mm-hmm. And some of those are quite clearly normal, but actually are they? Because is that person diabetic? Is a normal HbA1c a recipe for hypoglycemic attacks? Or is the reverse? Is there someone who lives their life on a cliff edge away from admission to hospital, but you don't know that? So the poem that I recently read, described the sort of one class of blood test results as "oh shit" results, which is the thing you say as you look at them. So coming back to it, I think that we have some fairly unique risk factors. So I don't think it's unique to us.
And I guess talking about the alphabet soup after your name and the clear diligence with which you practice clinically, and how do you manage that balance? I guess, have you got any pearls of wisdom on how you were able to stay sane and maintain some sort of personal life while doing the clinical work, the academic work, the publishing, the medical education. How, please?
I think finding things that you enjoy in all spheres, I think, is really, really important. So I have to say, being deputy editor of the BJGP is an absolute joy, partly because I get to read everybody's stories. I get to help people take ideas that are not quite formed and sometimes, nudge them into something sort of truly excellent. Sometimes we come across, present company included, so talented people that actually you barely need to add a full stop or a comma to. I don't know if you've read any of the articles by Ben Hoban but one of the things I'm so chuffed about, and I just wish I had it right to hand here, but the results of the column, he's actually produced a book of reflections, which is out now. And in terms of the whole "you are not aloneness," so I'm hijacking this podcast and turning it into a plug for the book. But just in terms of "you are not alone," his reflections, you could use one for each day of the year and just feel slightly less awful by the time you finish reading it. And also possibly check yourself before you do something that is you're falling into some sort of psychological or fallacious trap. So the idea that, for example, that just because someone has got one condition, that it automatically excludes them having another, which I think is something that I think we're at risk of as medics. So coming back to your question, leaning into stuff, having stuff that you enjoy, but also not taking on too much, I think has been my trick. I work 1.5 days as a GP, and prior to stepping up to 1.5 days, I was on 1 day as a GP, spread across 2 half days. And interestingly, I found the 2 half days really manageable. And the moment I stepped up to 1.5 days, it suddenly became quite taxing. And no doubt there are some people here who do 8 days a week listening into this saying, "Oh, you are such a flake, Andrew Papanikitas. In my day, we ate a diet of coal and we considered ourselves lucky." And okay, some people, this is what they're actually leaning in, hopefully, into what they enjoy, and they're but at the same time, I think even 10-day-a-week GPs need some time to decompress, potentially spend time with family, potentially talk to colleagues, potentially keep up with clinical practice. So for me, it's keeping a lid on how much I do in each sphere, and trying very hard to make them synergistic. So sometimes it's very hard because everyone wants slightly more than what they've hired you for. And when
practically, how does that look? I mean, do you have a spreadsheet? Is it, because it sounds very organized, the way you present it? I'm sure that's been honed over many years of
it's organic, and it isn't really a spreadsheet. First half of the week is sort of, the first 2 days of the week is clinical. And the second half of the week is mostly publishing, editorial writing, with little gaps for medical ethics work, sort of teaching, which and again, the second half of the week is more of a sort of moving puzzle, a sort of I think the metaphor I have is Tetris. The pieces are sort of floating down and you have to slot them in as they go, and every so often you have a week which takes up the full screen, and every so often things sort of, I try very, very, very hard not to book stuff in the evenings. And again, sometimes that's unavoidable because that's when people are free, especially people like us who are, if they're clinical, they're working flat out. Though having said that, but if I'm doing a clinical day, I'm usually in no fit state to do something intellectual afterwards. The answer is there is no answer. I think it's different for everybody, and I think for me, I'm not a spreadsheet person. Sometimes I have to be. The closest I've got is an electronic diary, which I've synchronized with my wife's on our phones. We tried keeping paper diaries; they didn't work. And so we have an idea of what we're doing and what each other is doing, so that we don't, book stuff that is going to result in our children being left outside of school for a week.
And you made reference to the Mediterranean aspect, heritage-wise, and obviously with your surname. I'm interested in that, and whether that's had any part to play in your interest in medical ethics and that kind of thing.
I think the medical ethics thing, again, when I was at medical school, it was actually a way of having a social life and talking about stuff that was interesting. And it was also a great way of having a debating society that wasn't about scoring points. It was about thinking about issues. And one of the things that I subsequently did at the Royal Society of Medicine was we set up the student section, and we created the idea of a triangular debate. So having a debate with three speakers taking slightly divergent positions, so that it wasn't a head-to-head. It wasn't about point scoring. It was about sort of teasing apart what the thoughts were on any particular issue, including things like professional boundaries, including things like work-life balance, including the idea of whether sort of justice and equity could be considered a core issue within healthcare, amongst others. So yeah, as opportunities for people to come together and sort of leave maybe feeling a bit frustrated, but also feeling heard.
And you serve on lots of committees, colleges, and things like that, societies. What's inspired you to go down that route?
I think unless people who understand what general practice is like take time out to stand up for GPs, it will just get worse and worse and worse, because the people who are deciding what we do and what's expected of us will have very little clue. So Jonathan Tomlinson, also known on Twitter as Mellow Johnny, did this fantastic picture of what he thinks is the sort of the public appreciation of what general practice is, and it was, this great big not a Venn diagram, this great big circle, and this tiny slice which is the easy stuff, and then all of the rest refer to hospital, as opposed to this kind of small slice of refer to hospital, and then this other small slice of easy stuff, and this massive great big pie of complex holding stuff for people who have been sent back from hospital, or are waiting indefinitely for hospital, or are unsuitable for a particular service. So unless people are prepared to step out and tell people, we're doomed.
Yeah.
And the other thing, of course, is that it can become a career. I think I've been really unlucky, because all of the committee work I've ever done has tended to be voluntary and unpaid. And eventually, I think what makes me step back is that the difficulty with which to do it becomes, it sort of eclipses the benefit done. And sometimes again that can be personal. So I think there are roles that I did when I was single with no kids that I wouldn't look at now. And in a way that's also quite bad, because it means that there's a set of voices that just aren't there.
And the phrase moral distress, obviously we've covered directly and indirectly so far, but when you think about the fact that you only work 1.5 days as a GP, where does that sit with kind of your idealistic view of the GP that you would love to be? Are you perhaps already able to achieve being that person, or are you compromised in a way, and how does that sit with you?
I think some compromises are unavoidable. I mean, I don't think the job is good enough or sorted enough for me to practice full time and feel I could do a good job, because I would just be potentially more pressured more of the time and possibly on a faster track to burnout. So I think that possibly the closest thing that I've ever got to thinking about sort of quitting, I think, was as a result of sort of putting up the hours, and it just, especially when you have a service that is at capacity, it just takes a couple of people to be ill or long-term ill to sort of trigger a sort of a domino effect where everyone else is working that much harder. So in one job, I sort of found myself being sort of on call pretty much all the days that I was in general practice, which again, that's what compromises the ability to have long conversations with people, to get to know people, because it's hard to get to know someone when you know that there's someone else waiting in the waiting room who's come in because they've got something that you need to see straight away. So I don't know. I don't know. I think that me working part-time makes me a nicer GP for people to interact with. So I think in that sense, I think that relatively speaking, my patients get a better deal. I think that's not the same for everybody. I really do. Some of the full time GPs I work with, I think, are absolutely amazing.
I like that. That's a nice positive note for us to end on.